Well, welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining. I'm Elliot, the Chief Product Officer here at Beauhurst. I work across both the product and the data teams. Those of you who joined our last webinar on industries will have heard me talk a bit about our journey from exclusively tracking these high growth companies to monitoring and understanding the whole UK economy. If you haven't seen it, I'll plug our Beauhurst video hub, which you can find on beauhurst.com for the full recording. This session is a little bit different. That was very much a deep dive into a single data set, how we built it, and how it touches a multitude of use cases. Today, we're going to be taking a different approach and dive really into how our data comes together with lots of other sources as well to solve real-world challenging problems. And to help me, I'm joined by Cara from our commercial team, who's going to lead a conversation with our special guest, Jim Sims, who's Head of Economic Development at Basildon Council. So thank you very much, Jim, for offering up your time to join us today. We'll also have a Q&A section at the end, so please share your questions in the chat. We had tons of questions last time and they were great, so please throw them in throughout, either for us at Beauhurst or for Jim. But yeah, I mean, as much as we try to predict when we're building out the data set, when we're evolving the product, what use cases we will enable as we go. Actually, I get most excited when a customer comes along and tells us something completely unexpected, teaches me something completely new about what they're trying to achieve and what they're already achieving. And really that opens up a kind of a whole branch of new ideas for how and where we can take the product next. My conversations with Jim have been a great example of this. You'll hear about how he's bringing together data from different sources and how maybe in the future we might be able to help with that even more. And if you have a really unique way that you're using the product, ones that we don't talk about much, please get in touch. It'd be really interesting to hear from you. I've spoken enough now, and I really hope you enjoy the discussion. So I'm going to pass over to Cara.
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. Hi, Jim. I guess to start off, it would be really useful just a bit of an overview of broadly how you're using Beauhurst and kind of how long you've been a subscriber, etc.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I think I could probably spend 30 minutes just talking about how I'm using Beauhurst alone. So I think we've been a subscriber for 3 years, but I've only been in post at Basildon for about that time anyway. So I think it was clear to me when I came into post that we were lacking a really kind of good quality knowledge base that was going to help us understand more about our kind of indigenous business community. I'd worked with Fame before, but found that a little bit clunky and a little bit analytic, a bit heavy on the user end, not very intuitive. And I think somebody recommended Beauhurst to me, so I asked for a demo, and I was kind of excited by initially the fact that you were tracking what I think Nesta used to call the vital six, the 6% of businesses that were going to create 50% of the jobs in X number of years' time. And so that was the kind of initial appeal, because I think there's not a lot of existing proprietary databases that do that. I also think we were moving towards an account management model. So we wanted to identify those kind of key strategic businesses in our borough that we wanted to maintain and develop a relationship with. And so we needed to kind of run a range of criteria around, were they trading internationally? Were they large employers? Were they this vital 6%? So to end up with a portfolio of around about 130 that we could say, okay, they're the key ones that we want to develop and maintain relationships with. And Beauhurst was phenomenal in terms of helping us deliver that. I think the other thing I'd say is that in terms of fostering those relationships, actually doing your research before you encounter those companies or engaging with those companies about things that you know about them. For example, I was at a networking event with a care home that has got about, I think, 120 care homes in our borough. And in the course of using Beauhurst, they'd split what was one strategic business unit into 120. And I was in conversation with the owner at a networking event. I said, "Oh, you've just done this." And he said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Well, I make it my business to know that." And I said, "Can I come and see you and talk about what you're trying to achieve?" And he said, "Absolutely." So for us, it kind of provides us with a level of quality of knowledge and understanding that allows us to build relationships and take people up a kind of cycle of prosperity. Moreover than that, I helped write the Create Growth Fund bid for the southeast of England. We use a lot of Beauhurst data in the analytics. Really interesting the way you can set up workflows around things like new companies that have located into your area, send them a letter, welcome to the borough, tell them if they want to come and talk to you. So there's lots of ways that we're using it across business engagement, inward investment, client retention, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an invaluable tool, and I wouldn't be without it.
Nice. And I guess on that account management piece and how this kind of came around as we bumped into each other at UK Reef, may or may not had a gin in our hand at the time. But the conversation was, of course, about commercial property, which was the purpose of that event. So it'd be really great for you to kind of repeat what you said to me there and how you're using that data to work on the commercial property aspect.
So I think initially we were in a situation where we had an inquiry from a large national pub chain, and this is what kicked it off. And they were looking for a premises of a reasonable size in a market town where our occupancy levels were quite high. I'm not saying all of our town occupancy levels are quite high. I wish they were, but this was a specific issue where they were looking for premises, and we were unable to satisfy their requirement by simply saying, here's something that's available for you immediately, come and have a look around this premises. I was under quite a bit of pressure from political sources to see whether I could come up with a solution to this particular inquiry. So I thought to myself, okay, if it isn't already available on the market, what else might I do if I was looking at somebody who might be relevant? So I thought the first thing to do was to run a search on another property database around properties that were in the size bracket that the company wanted. And it kind of revealed to me there was a mix of kind of institutional property holders, local people, and a mix of different owners. And I thought to myself, actually some of those things look like propcos, and they're a bit difficult because propcos, as we know, are often established as kind of single entities in order to hold that property in a larger group. And again, then the light went on, and I remembered that in Beauhurst there's that amazing functionality of organizational structure where you can look at the kind of family tree of companies. So I thought to myself, well, actually I should go and have a look at some of these things, and then started drilling into the limited number of properties that I had available, and started to discover a couple of them were really badly geared and quite heavily leveraged, and had recently acquired, by going to the mortgages and charges section, a large piece of greenfield land in another part of South Essex, and thought to myself, actually, how are they going to fund that planning application that they probably want to submit for that development? How are they going to overcome their liquidity problem in order to bring forward that development? It occurred to me maybe they would be open for potentially selling one of their portfolio in order to fund the development of the larger strategic asset. So started to basically overlay Beauhurst financial data over what I had on the property data, and subsequently then wrote to the Inquirer and said, here are a couple of people in the area who currently own property in the area of the size that you're looking at, and they may be open to having a dialogue with you. And I think that's where we started this piece of work. And then we've subsequently sought to try and then be much more strategic. And I don't know whether you want me to go into that, Cara, or whether you want to open it up for questions, or how you want to work from there.
No, go ahead. Go into the strategy.
So having then thought about some of the challenges that we have in terms of curating our high streets, I don't know if anybody else kind of has joined the webinar has the same problem, but often I go to planners, and planners say to me, well, Class E is Class E is Class E. I can't really dictate whether it's going to be a nail bar or a hairdressers or a cafe. And there's not a lot in the planning system that can be done in order to curate the high street. It started to kind of occur to us that actually we have the ability, or we had the ability potentially, by crashing together property ownership data, landlord data, together with potential tenant data, lease end data, and also looking at the financial viability of some of those landlords and tenants to potentially play a more active game ahead of what we might call the traditional agent market, by rather than just sitting and waiting for the property to come on the market and the particulars to appear, and then everybody tries to rush in to try and get it, and it's a bidding process of the highest price. It occurred to me that that there may be opportunities to work in advance of the market by looking at some of that data and perhaps trying to see whether you're finding there are tenants that are sorry to say, about to trip over or fall over, or whether landlords' portfolios were in a situation where they might consider alternative propositions from people. We see very few freeholds coming on the market. We've got loads of people who want freeholds rather than leaseholds. So again, and we've expanded this kind of methodology into industrial parks. I've got an industrial park at the moment where I'm seeing quite a lot of residential creep. And the problem with residential creep, it's quite close to a high street proximity. The problem with residential creep is it's diminishing the employment density in that industrial park, and therefore is in danger of hollowing out the high street, because you've got less local footfall who are using the high street at lunchtimes and things like that. So I'm trying to densify and introduce more managed workspace, some more employment uses with heavier densities into those spaces. So I'm looking for those industrial sheds that are kind of likely to come on the market within the next 6 to 8 months, and then try and introduce them to manage workspace operators, or introduce the landlords to manage workspace operators, to try and move industrial premises into more office-based activity in order to maintain the overall employment density within that site. So that's another way that we're trying to use big data in order to affect those outcomes. And then lastly, the other thing that's driven us towards doing is, as part of our local plan making process, we have roughly about 21,000 new jobs that we're going to have to find space for by 2042. And if the local plan is to be considered sound, we have to develop a reasonably robust evidence base as to how we think we're going to do that. So we've been working a lot. I should say lots of this work has built on registrations with CoStar or EG Radius. We're now working in LandClan, which is an Esri tool, which is really quite phenomenal in terms of it's got a lot of land registry data in it. And we're working and looking at individual industrial estates and trying to correlate land ownership data with tenant data, and their in order initially to find if there's any additional capacity on those industrial estates, whether we can intensify or infill some of those industrial estates in order to create those jobs. We also happen to be looking to see whether we've also got land parcels under our ownership as a council nearby as well, because that might allow it, an interesting conversation with some of the existing landowners about joint ventures. The other ones that are slightly more complicated, and we just write them off, are the really dense industrial estates where they're kind of wholly bounded by residential development, and you're not going to get anything else on there. But I think in the next phase of the development, when we then overlay financial data on those landowners and tenants, it will allow us to start seeing opportunities. And I'll finish on this one. I'll give you one last example. I've got one company that is now, to its complete and utter frustration, split across 4 sites in Basildon, separated by some distance and travel, principally because they've expanded, but never been able to find a property of the right kind of size in order to accommodate their growth trajectory. So again, my sense is that, this was born by a particular situation in our area where a registered social landlord went into administration, and I happened to find that out ahead of the market, introduced a tenant that I know was looking to expand to that landlord, and they struck a deal, and I managed to retain about 150 jobs in the borough because they were going outside of the borough. So again, that correlation of knowing the financial health of the landlord and the tenant is allowing us to, I think, intervene more proactively in our commercial property market space than we might have ordinarily been able to as a more passive kind of observer of the flows of the market.
Nice. I think we hear that quite a lot, is that it's being proactive, as you said, being ahead of the market and monitoring those kind of contraction and expansion opportunities within tenants, and then of course with the landlords as well. Nice. Okay, I'm conscious to give time for questions, but I guess one more question from me would be kind of broadly some of the results you've seen, maybe not just with commercial property, but I know with some of the other bids you've done as well.
So I think in terms of the commercial property stuff, I think we are probably, the results, the tangible results, probably still early days because we've only been doing this for probably about 6 months. But certainly, I think we've managed to retain about 250 jobs, safeguard about 250 jobs in the borough by trying to introduce tenants who are coming to lease end to companies that were either keen to sell or were open to alternative offers. I think it's probably we're still waiting on the sort of outcome of the pub chain approach, but the feedback from them has been universally positive in terms of they want to engage and they want to come and have a look at the site again, so that they, I think, they're if I'm being blunt about it, I'm not sure they're the kind of operator that would always want to pay full price for something that appears on the market. And somewhere like Basildon, its land values, are quite high. So that kind of approach appealed to them in a kind of philosophical sense. They like the idea of getting ahead of the market before perhaps the agents had really bid the price up. Sorry to say that if there's any agents on the call, but I think you could equally be using this tool as well. I think the other thing that I'd say is that it's probably too early to say in terms of the industrial audit, but it's clear that we are starting, I think, to identify some possible opportunities around underutilized employment land, where there may be opportunities to intensify those sites, and where the owners would be open for some form of collaboration or joint venture. And I guess if we were not using this kind of data to do that kind of work, we wouldn't be as targeted and I think as likely to achieve a level of success. So it's still early days, but I think my real sense is that we will, I think, start to see some real returns from this kind of work with really trying to curate the market rather than necessarily allow it to just happen around us without any form of intervention.
Nice, thanks. Elliot, was there any questions that have come through at all?
Thanks, Sachin. That was really interesting. I guess I'm interested. It sounds like you're using a real breadth of features in Beauhurst and beyond. I guess, do you have any advice for people that are maybe earlier in the journey, just getting started, where they might want to kind of dive in first with Beauhurst or kind of similar?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is, again, that point about I don't know if anybody else had this experience, but I spent most of my life in some form of business engagement, and you always know there's always going to be some customer at the end of your communications who's going to take a red pen and circle your letter and hate when you've put an apostrophe in the wrong place. And often I think the perception within the business community is often that as local authorities we're kind of slightly lazy civil servants. So for me, I'd say that point about using Beauhurst in order to inform your comms dialogue, we now have lots of conversations with other departments within our organisation. Where you can use Beauhurst data to have an informed conversation with people that feels immediately personalised and feels like you're not just sending out a generic piece of literature. Your ability, particularly around things like timelines, the timeline data and seeing what's happening within that field. We also, do stuff around trying to look after those companies that we consider in distress. I don't know if you've seen insolvency data and stuff like that lately, but you can use credit ratings and stuff like that, and we overlay some of that data with people who are late payers on sort of business rates or rent, in order to really try and target programs around trying to help those companies that are really struggling. I think my observation would be, if this is not too commercial, get yourself a subscription and then have a play around with the data, because it's only as limiting as your own imagination about how you can use it. I think there is there's lots of really useful ways that you can do stuff, and it isn't, in my sense, it's all about scaffolding relationships. So even if you just start by clicking on the owner and developing a relationship around LinkedIn, and then you follow them on LinkedIn, and then what we then tend to do is when they post something about a success of their business, we retweet it, and we get a like from them, and we say, can we come and see you? So it's kind of almost the start of every workflow. Beauhurst has become the start of lots of different workflows in our activity, whereby it is all about trying to take people up that kind of cycle of increasing engagement and build really solid, firm relationships with them.
Nice. I have another question. So I think another crossover between kind of the commercial property industry and working with councils is that inward investment piece. I guess with commercial property, they typically work in regional offices, and it's finding businesses that they kind of want to attract to that region. It'd be great to hear a little bit about how you're using the data on that piece.
I haven't. I mean, I think there's a challenge, isn't there, around slightly inward investment for many local authorities, insofar as increasingly kind of FDI stuff we leave to non-political organisations that don't get lots of FOI requests when they step over the border of the UK, because I don't know about anybody else, but as soon as either an officer or a member in my authority, unless it's externally funded, any foreign trip we go on, you get lots of FOIs. So we tend not to go down that route. Equally, I don't think our job is about trawling neighbouring localities and poaching companies to come to Basildon, because there's a zero-sum game. For me, I think that I would say that our predominant use of it is probably more around what I would call investor development. I haven't quite got to this yet, but I've got in my mind 2 or 3 companies who I know are telling me that they own their own premises and they are expanding at a rapid rate and cannot find suitable property to occupy. And in that regard, I'm incredibly nervous that if I don't find them something, they're going to get in that same situation where they've got distributed sites and it becomes a painful, unproductive piece of work for them. So I think I am quite interested in looking at employment densities. So, one of the things that could be quite interesting is looking at the space ownership of particular businesses and then looking at their employment numbers. And particularly, I think we've got to probably create, I think I saw a piece of work by a really amazing researcher the other day called Jim Plunkett-Cole, who was estimating 40% hybrid working. So you could apply a factor to that to say, well, actually, a number of those employees might be hybrid working, and the factor might vary depending on what particular industry they worked in, more likely to be higher in office than it might be in industrial or light industrial or manufacturing. But then ultimately look at the employment densities of the companies and compare it to benchmarks, and then starting to identify those companies that are demonstrating signs of expanding at such a rapid rate that they can't occupy their own premises. So I think my answer to your question is in terms of the kind of inward investment stuff, it probably is more at the property end of stuff and identifying properties that might come on the market in a certain period of time, and then having a conversation with those companies about what their plans are. So it's kind of playing the dynamics, if you know what I mean, of the property market together with the inquiries, together with the financials, to see whether you can strike a deal for the right kind of inquiries. And those inquiries that come that we all get that we don't really like the look of because they tend to be dirty industry, we tend to go, well, we're not going to apply those models to that kind of thing, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it's probably more relocations and expansions that we focus on rather than FDI, is the answer to your question.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting. We're coming towards the end of the session, kind of flown by. But Jim, I'll give you one opportunity. Do you have a request for what a data point or something like that you wish we'd added to the platform to make your job easier?
Any other data points in Beauhurst that make?
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, I'm fascinated that we track the sort of 10% and 20% growth companies. But in some senses, I'm also interested in looking at the sort of 5 to 10s and who are the ones that are just, bubbling under, and what can we do to get them up. So I tend to do periodically run that search regularly, and I don't presently have access to the network function, but I've made it my business to try and know who the high net worth individuals are in my borough, and we reach out to them for a variety of things, mostly, if I'm honest, in the first instance, to try and help them. I'm never a great fan of asking them whether they can help me before I've helped them. And then again, we've developed relationships with some of them where they now sit on our investment panels for our young entrepreneurs programs and things like that. So Beauhurst has been very useful in that regard of engaging with people who are really interested in investment and putting time back into young people. So yeah, lots of really interesting stuff.
Lovely, thanks. Yeah, I think, Cara, unless you had a final question, I think we're about time.
I think there's one in the chat, actually, Elliot. There's
yes.
You mentioned family tree, which sounds invaluable to understanding local businesses, and that you've used other tools in the past. I was interested what else Beauhurst enabled you to do over and others as we're exploring this as an option. So my sense is that I think just simple stuff. I'll give you another example. And you'll be able to help me here, Elliot. But the way that Beauhurst aggregates data from other platforms is unique in my mind. So one of the things that you've got, for example, is the technology, the digital technology that the companies are using on their website. And somebody I spoke to in the digital industry told me that you can buy that as a separate data set if you want it. But effectively, I can go and look at how mature some of our companies are in terms of their use of digital technologies within their business. And if we are interested in driving the productivity of our business base and trying inherently to encourage businesses to adopt AI and technologies which will help them compete on a global scale, that kind of data inside Beauhurst is again unique. I don't get that in Financial Analysis Made Easy. I don't get that in other company databases. So it helps me in terms of identifying those that might be in a ready state to consider about and introducing them to digital innovation more effectively. So lots of different stuff in there that's really useful.
Great. Thank you very much. One final thing, you mentioned in one of your responses that you use the timeline. I'll say watch this space. We're looking at improving that very shortly, really expanding our news coverage to hundreds of thousands of companies. Right now it's kind of on a smaller set of companies, so hopefully that's even more helpful for the monitoring as well. We're now at time, unfortunately. Thank you very much everyone for joining, and thank you so much, Jim. It's really interesting chat. Learn more every time we chat, so that's really great. But yeah, thank you, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, Jim.
Yes,
Thanks,
bye-bye.
everybody. Thanks, Cara. Thanks, Elliot. Take care.